Welcome to the session called The Future of Food. The most important part of the title is actually the question mark at the end. And those of you who've been with us for the last couple of days will know that we've been very much focused on finding answers in the other sessions. This is a session where we'll allow ourselves to ask some questions. I know my favorite quote about the future is that actually it's here already, it's just unevenly distributed. So think about that. The future is here already, it's just unevenly distributed. We should be hearing 4 narratives about the future of food. Some of them will challenge the prevailing orthodoxy. That's sort of an oxymoron, but there we go. But my point is, now listen to these presentations with an open mind. And remember that many of the veterans of the sustainable ag community came from unusual backgrounds and with some pretty wacky ideas back then in the 70s. 20 years later, in the 90s, in the mid-90s, when I joined the movement, I was actually pleasantly surprised by how inclusive and how welcoming that sustainable ag community was to a newcomer. Now there's a third wave underway. And let us be as inclusive today as we were then to what they have to say. And the larger the community becomes, the more challenging it is actually to be inclusive, because actually we may think there are enough of us and so on. So important for this session is listen to what these people have to say with an open mind. Each speaker will have about 10 to 12 minutes to reflect on where their business or their activities stand on the issue of true cost. Then Volker Engelsmann will respond and give some opening questions to what we've just heard. Volker Engelsmann is Dutch and has been involved with bringing fresh organic produce and fruit to people through market mechanisms over the last 25 years, using very innovative ways of transparency and identification. So, welcome to the session about the future of food. Bon appetit. I'm going to give it over to Josh Tetrick as the first speaker. Josh founded Hampton Creek in 2011 and has built a company around the question of what would it look like if we started all over in food. So over to you, Josh.
Thanks, guys. So about 5 years ago, I'm not in San Francisco. I'm in a tiny little internet cafe in Monrovia, Liberia, the 3rd poorest country on the planet. I went to Liberia mostly because I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and I wanted to have an impact. Both of those things. And Monrovia, Liberia was the last of 7 stops I had across sub-Saharan Africa. I was working in northern Kenya with farmers. Lots of farmers in northern Kenya are experiencing all these awful conditions related to drought, trying to help them a little bit. I was in South Africa in a township called Khayelitsha, trying to get kids off the street and into school. And when I was there, again, I went there with a good heart. I went there with a good intention. Unfortunately, for me and for the world, all those things sound a little bit better than they actually were. And I don't know if you've ever had anything in your life that sounds a lot better than it actually is. The impact, when I say it out loud, of helping all those kids wasn't actually the real impact that we were having. The truth is I was spending more money on traveling around, on staying at hotels, than I was the actual lives that we were saving. And I was frustrated. It wasn't because I was a bad dude. It wasn't because the United Nations is an inefficient organization or the nonprofits I was working with didn't have their act together. It was because sometimes the pace of change just isn't fast enough. So I got back to the United States, and I didn't just ask this question, what would it look like if we started over in the context of food, but I also asked it with my own life. I didn't want to waste my life. I didn't want to go like a lot of my law school friends, have some soul-sucking job where I make lots of money doing nothing for the world. I wanted to see if there was a way I could throw my life, my energy, my soul into something that was actually good in a way that didn't just sound good, but actually was good in a scalable way. So what do? I looked at systems. I looked at healthcare. I looked at education. I looked at transportation. All systems, I bet, that smart people are in this audience, if we were going to say, let's start over, we probably would, right? In the world of education, we probably teach people how to actually think instead of teaching them to memorize things. In the world of healthcare, we'd probably focus a little bit more on preventing these awful illnesses instead of treating them with lots of drugs. In the world of transportation, maybe we'd start out with a zero-emissions car instead of trying to fix our way through the problem. But I got really obsessed with the world of food, mostly because I was raised on a lot of shitty food. I was raised sort of the intersection of a 7-Eleven, cinnamon rolls in a vending machine, and a Burger King in Birmingham, Alabama. And when I asked my mom, speaking of the true cost of food, why am I eating like this? Because I see my grandparents with heart disease. I see my great-grandparents who died of type 2 diabetes. Why are we eating like this? And my mom said to me, we don't have enough money to eat any other way. The true cost of food, right? We've created a world where it is damn easy to eat in a shitty way. So I decided to look at the food system and say, well, what does it look like if we just started over? What does it look like if we just remove these bullshit preconceptions and this garbage that we have in our head about what the food system should look like, and we just create what we want it to look like? And my answer isn't the perfect answer, but it's mine, and it's my company's Hampton Creek. If we were to start over, we'd create a food system that looks like this. One in which the right food choice, the food choice that is better for the environment, the food choice that is more supportive of farmers, the food choice that uses less water and less land, that food choice would also be the food choice that tastes better, would also be the food choice, speaking of the true cost, it's actually more affordable. Not the same, not a little bit more expensive, but more affordable. Thinking if we could create this world of food together, even if you didn't give a damn, you would still choose it. And I think that's something important for all of us to keep in mind, because we're in this fancy Fort Mason Center here in San Francisco, and we all care about all these good things related to food. But the fact is, when you live on less than $30,000 a year, when you're living out of a white envelope, when you're a poor kid in Liberia, you ain't thinking about it. You're eating because it tastes good and it's cheap. How do we figure out a way to create a food system where it is impossible not to do the right thing? And our theory of the case is, if we could create that food system, then food would be a real platform for change. Food would connect us with our values again. Food would be more than just food. It would help to solve a lot of these problems. So then we started Hampton Creek, and crazy stuff happened. We raised over $250 million. All these people that didn't give a damn about food before said, we support this. Whether Mark and Lynn Benioff is on our board, or the co-founder of Facebook, Charlene Heineken of the Heineken family, or Jerry Yang, all these people that I couldn't even imagine meeting in my life decided to start this question, what would it look like if we started over? Now, the difficult thing for me is I don't know how to cook. I don't know how to bake. I baked one thing in my life. What do I know about food? All I knew was the question and what I wanted the answer to be. So what we've decided to do at Hampton Creek is to build an entire technology platform that's around a very simple insight. There are 400,000 species of plants in this world. 400,000. And for some insane reason, we've decided to become really ferociously addicted to 4. Corn and soy and wheat and sugar. And for some crazy reason, we forgot that there's a lot out there. There are a lot of good farmers, not just in Nebraska, but in West Africa too, that are growing all these things we could actually use. So we have a team of computational biologists and biochemists that screen through all these plant species. We dig into the molecular properties. We try to find the best of them, and then use them almost as fundamental building blocks to make all sorts of different food better, right? Some of the farmers we work with are like this guy, it's Tony. He works in upstate New York. He grows something called sorghum. Sorghum doesn't use a lot of land. Sorghum doesn't use a lot of water. Sorghum has a clean taste. And importantly, when you put a particular varietal of sorghum in a pancake, it's good. And you can sell it to Walmart for a pretty cheap price. And you can create a product like a pancake that meets the philosophy. Now, there's a lot of technical stuff behind it. I'm not going to really get into it right now. We don't have the time. But there's a discovery platform. We screen through all this stuff. We want to do this out of a 95,000 square foot food facility that we're in today. We want to attack lots of different products. We want the philosophy of making the right thing, the easy thing, to just encompass lots of different things, not just mayo, but pancakes, not just pancakes, but snacks, not just snacks, but soups, the entire pantheon of the world's food products. We're also interested in doing things that have never been done before. You know, micronutrient deficiency is a big deal today. It's a really big deal. And what if we can create nutrient-dense products that are fun for kids to play with in the developing world? If we could do that, then we'll get into that too. So just to quickly run through it, this idea, this philosophy was just sort of, it was me, it was my dog, it was my ex-girlfriend's apartment, but now it is almost every single solitary major retail partner here in the United States of America. We're also in Hong Kong. We have a 5-year agreement with the biggest food service company in the world, Compass Group. You can find our stuff in fancy restaurants like Momofuku in New York City, even fancier restaurants like Beefsteak in Washington, D.C. But you can also find our stuff in very unlikely places, places that make me feel pretty proud, places like the Dollar Tree. Now, you might hear the Dollar Tree speaking of the true cost of food and be like, what the hell are you doing there? But if you think about what we want, what I think we all want, if we could start over, the good thing would be the easiest thing. Even if you didn't care, even if you didn't have the means, even if you didn't have the time, even if you were buying food out of a white envelope. And lots of good people shop at the Dollar Tree. Probably the best example of our want to have an impact through the food system is actually with Compass Group, the biggest food service company in the world. Bon Appetit Management is a sector in the Compass Group. They're actually helping drive lots of the food service here. This is the impact that we've had just from switching out different categories at Compass Group. Over 1 billion gallons of water saved, hundreds of square feet of land preserved, and our focus in the world of Compass Group is literally not having the good thing become an option. Because I think that's the problem. Right now, the bad thing isn't an option. The bad thing typically is the only thing. If you're at a restaurant, if you're at a university cafe, if you're at a stadium, if you're at a hospital, even if you're in the aisles of Walmart. But what does it look like if the thing that is good, the thing that is more righteous, the thing that is more just, is the thing that's more affordable, sexier, more delicious? So we're eliminating big brands that maybe aren't doing the best they could right now at Compass Group. Brands you've heard of, Unilever, General Mills. And I hope they respond not by being upset about it, by getting better and attempting to do everything they can to push us out, because that's how we make the food system better together. I'll skip over a lot of this. You know, this is sort of how we think about growth. And I'll actually just go to the last slide. I never wanted what we're doing at Hampton Creek to be some shill for venture capitalists. I have no interest in ever selling the company. I want to do this for the next 40 years. There's a lot of starting over to be done. We're not the only company that can do it right. But I want what we do to really have an impact. And we're going back to Liberia, the place that this frustration sort of started. And we're beginning to develop products for them. We're beginning to develop products for school kids in Liberia who, instead of trying to sell their bodies to make enough money to buy food, can actually just eat a better food product, in school. With that, I'll sit down. I can't thank you guys enough. I know lots of people in this audience. Paul, I see you. Jason over there. A lot of you have been deeply a part of our success. We got a lot to do, a lot to get better on, but we'll keep pushing. I appreciate it, guys.
Thank you, Josh. I'm going to pass it over to David Lee as the second speaker, who comes from Impossible Foods, where he leads the marketing, finance, human resource, and IT facilities and supply chain functions. That's a lot that's quite a brief. So I love the word impossible. I think that's really, to me, that I hate to make things that are impossible possible. So I'm going to see what you did with the word impossible.
Well, let's talk about it. It's my privilege to not talk about me, but about the company I've recently joined. I'd like you to walk in my shoes a bit because I'm 3 months old at the company. And so I'm going to share with you what I saw 3 months ago to vote with my feet. As mentioned, I'm our COO. I handle things of business. I'm joined by a wonderful founder who for 5 years has been working on the science. His name's Pat Brown. He had a distinguished career at Stanford, and he asked the following question. If I want to transform the global food system, how do I do it? And I'm going to get very specific in a bit about how we're trying to do it, but the middle part of what you're seeing is important. Because how we think you do it is not to remind people about the costs, not to remind people about how terrible food today is for the environment. We think the way you do it is you make a better product. I spent a number of years running the Del Monte Foods brand. You could argue that we were on the wrong side of the issue, but canned fruits and veg are not bad for you. And I learned the hard way that when you try to educate the consumer to eat better, to have less of an environmental footprint, they hear you and understand, but no matter how you quantify the cost, they're only motivated if they have the ability to satisfy a craving. So at Impossible Foods, we believe the only way to do this is to create products that appeal, in our case, to the hardcore meat eater, of which I am one. So the way we're doing it is incredibly, impossibly, directly from plants. And I know that sounds crazy, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time today walking you through how we think about this. First of all, we all know that this is a $1 trillion opportunity, but the opportunity for our founder wasn't in the dollar sign. It was in the sheer amount of impact one could have if you attacked the question of how do you create craveable meat and dairy from plants in a way that has a far smaller environmental footprint. Pat's an ambitious guy. He likes to say that we'll see the impact we could have if we're successful from space, and he really means this. But the reality is, if you're going to attract the best talent, if you're going to attract the kind of investors that Hampton Creek and Impossible Foods share, folks like Bill Gates and Coastal Ventures, et cetera, you better have a great business model. So at Impossible Foods, we are as focused on the environmental impact as we are on how we're going to make money. Not because we're purely into the capitalists of the world, it's because it's the only way to have a sustainable advantage. So let's talk about how we do it. We were founded by a scientist. Before I knew Pat, I did as much research as I could. I talked to a few academics at Stanford. And candidly, what he'll never share is he's a bit of a rock star. I mean, microarrays and PLOS. This is the guy that founded the Public Library of Science, as some of you may know. Well, about 5 years ago, he said, forget about the way the food industry works. I'm going to take a fundamental view. I'm going to try to determine at a basic R&D level what makes food, and particularly in this case, meat, taste meaty, smell the way meat needs to smell. And he took a long time. He hired the best scientists he knew, about 100 scientists, and he reverse engineered and discovered what we believe to be a critical secret component, if you will, the key, we believed, that our product tastes meaty versus others. And what it is, it's called heme, H-E-M-E, heme, right? So heme, the molecule that's found in bacteria and plants and animals, it's in myoglobin. It's why red meat in particular looks red. It carries oxygen, it carries iron, and it's incredibly distasteful when raw. But it turns out when you cook heme, in the context of other things, it produces thousands of aromatics and complex molecules that make meat taste like meat. So now that he understood why meat tasted like meat, and it's true not just for red meat, but it's true for chicken and fish and for dairy as well, he then looked at how do we create a way for us to protect from those large players today who are having a negative impact on our environment, but are very successful in this trillion-dollar industry. So he protected it. But in addition to protecting it, he discovered a source of heme that's found in everyday plants. It's not a secret. We've talked about it in the past, but it's unusual. It's in the root nodules of a soy plant. And yes, I know we all have our concerns with soy. But in the root nodules of a soy plant is legume hemoglobin. We found a way, after this first discovery over the next 2 years, to produce it. And we've decided to produce it in the form of what we're calling the Impossible Burger. This was very intentional. We wanted a high bar. We wanted something that people would crave. You know, you have a hamburger, if you're a meat eater, you know whether it tastes like a real burger or not. We wanted something that could have huge impact. Hamburgers, you know, it's unbelievable, but it's one of the largest contributors in the meat world to greenhouse gases. Millennials are the #1 eater of hamburgers. Millennials, by the way, who disproportionately spend more money on food and are more interested in knowing what they're putting in their bodies than any other demographic. This was a high bar. And it's a reason why the company has been in stealth largely for 4.5 to 5 years. So here we are, out in the open, now beginning to sell this product. Just this last week, we hosted an event in New York. We served over 400 chefs at the Chefs Collaborative, Our Impossible Burger. It went very well. We were just written up in Food and Wine. I encourage you to take a look, because Food and Wine is a pretty high bar on what they consider to be a good tasting burger. Tracy Desjardins, our chef, cooked it in their lab kitchens to a community that has a very, very focused sense of what a good meaty burger tastes like. And from what I see in the article, it looks like we're ready to launch. So that's where we are. More specifically, we are now out. You will find us initially in the back half of this year in fine dining restaurants and better burger establishments. And let me explain why from a marketing standpoint. One of the first lessons I learned in marketing is that it's very hard to educate the consumer. You know, my first job was in advertising, and in advertising what I learned is you have to have a better tasting product. If you focus on the costs, if you focus on all the negatives, you will only make them feel guilty. And then they'll go have a burger, a real cow burger. You got to focus on what makes them interested. And so for us, it's a great tasting burger without compromise. And some of the compromises, you know, in initial prototypes, were the fact it just didn't taste good enough. So what I'm showing you here is over time, the team has successfully increased the appeal value of this product. And I'm not giving you the latest. June of 2015 is quite old. But if we were to do the same testing, which we regularly do today, you'd be astounded by the quantum leaps in how much consumers like it. I've been at the company for 3 months. I've already tasted 3 prototypes in the last 3 months. And I got to tell you, when I serve it at home, because I'm a terrible cook, but I'm an avid cook, to my family, if they love it and say it's a great tasting burger, to me, beyond all the quantitative metrics, it's ready to consider it for prime time. So we're partnering with chefs initially, and you know, we're taking a phased approach. This is a bit like climbing Everest. It used to be that teams would say, well, we're not ready to launch until we have perfection. My view is we've already launched, but we have certain phases and base camps. You see that we're going to go from hundreds of pounds of burger production a month to thousands by the end of the summer, to hundreds of thousands by January. And candidly, I intend for demand to exceed supply at every phase of our launch. That is now true today for where we are, as you can see. I also think that we are unique in the sense that the burger can naturally perform at higher-end exclusive settings. We had a great event at Jardiniere, Tracy Desjardins' flagship restaurant. That's pretty fancy dining. All the way down to your local McDonald's. Because the burger, unlike a lot of other product forms, is desired in a craveable, exclusive, premium way. Think of a Wagyu burger to your everyday burger that your meat eater wants to have on the street corner. So you'll see us start at the higher end and create the buzz that we are starting to create, as in the Food and Wine article. And as we create a strategic moat around the brand, and as we ramp up supply, you'll see us more and more every day. So this launch, of course, will ultimately result, we think, in being at retail. We're choosing to wait. We want to make sure that when it's available in your local grocery store, when it's available to everybody, it's actually ready. So we're starting with fine dining because we have a technology that allows us to experiment and improve sequentially quite rapidly. And to be clear, this product, we will design it to be at or lower at cost when it's provided at retail. In fact, today, we have line of sight to being lower than the cost of common 80/20 ground beef. And part of the reason why is because it uses less resources. You know, when you use 99% less water, 85% less land, when you emit far fewer greenhouse gases than the burger made from a cow, it turns out you can make it pretty cheaply at scale. So this market, we'll start first, as you can see, with this very large market because it can have a very large impact if we are a great option for ground beef. But the intent of the company and our investors who have backed us is to go beyond just our first product. As I mentioned, our platform and technology in discovering heme is also, by the way, the reason why chicken tastes meaty. It's the reason why dairy tastes like dairy. So there'll be much more to come beyond our initial product. And with that, I'll give back time to the group.
Thank you. Hey, Dave. Our third speaker is Jonathan Wolfson. He co-founded TerraVia, which was previously called Solarzyme, back in 2003. So you've been at this for quite a long time. And we look much forward to what you have to say and what your story is this afternoon. So welcome to the panel, Jonathan.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Can you hear me? Can't tell if this is... Okay. I think, there we go. Thank you for having me up here today. And yeah, it's been 13 years since we founded the company. We founded the company, a very standard story, but a true one nonetheless. We started the company in a garage in Palo Alto with, in this case, believe it or not, we had aquariums filled with test tubes full of algae. We started the company really simply based on the precept of how can you do something that's better for people and better for the planet. We were also starting a private company, so obviously at the same time we were figuring out how we were going to be able to do the work and how ultimately we were going to be able to provide returns to our investors. But we started the company with the idea that algae is the way forward. One of what I would call, and you've probably heard this a few times over the last few days, it's something that we've been talking about for a lot of years, silver buckshot. Big, serious challenges facing us in feeding the planet the right way, with the healthiest foods, with the lowest footprint, water, carbon, and making it accessible, making it economically accessible to people, taking into account all of the externalities as well, the externalities of agriculture, food production, small-scale farmers. These are the kinds of things that we've spent well over a decade thinking about. What we do is we harness the power of algae to deliver important solutions around food, nutrition, and specialty ingredients. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that, but I'm also going to tell you why algae. You've heard about algae a lot over many years in lots of ways, and you may only know it as something that you tried in a green drink in the grocery store, or maybe you had a supplement, or you tried some spirulina powder, which if you did, it was good for you, but it probably didn't taste awfully fantastic. So I'm going to tell you about how we thought about this, and I'm also going to tell you the background, because ultimately it's really important for people to understand what they're eating, the provenance of what they're eating, and also the history of what they're eating. Algae is the mother of all plants. This is not our tree, and I wouldn't expect many of you to have spent a lot of time looking at a phylogenetic tree, but that's what you got here. You got a tree that represents the entire plant kingdom. This particular tree was produced by the U.S. Botanical Garden. And I took the liberty of defacing this tree with two things, only two things, a small white line at the bottom and a TerraVia logo. That's it. All plants evolved from algae. And there's a reason that this is particularly critical when we talk about food. Let's talk about why we eat plants. We eat plants for healthy fats. We eat plants for protein. We eat plants for fiber. We eat plants for a whole host of micronutrients. Broadly speaking, we eat plants for nutrition and sustenance. Before any of the plants you can think of were making healthy fats or fiber or protein or most of the micronutrients that you can think of, algae were. And there are hundreds of thousands of different genus and species of algae. It is a huge population. One of the challenges with respect to bringing algae, more broadly speaking, out into the world is producing it with high purity, with great taste, and with economic accessibility. And guess what? That has been a hard and long task. Harder and longer than I think many of us thought it would be at the beginning. Over a decade we've been pursuing this. We've invested over $500 million in this pursuit. And I'm happy to say that after over a decade, all of the critical pieces are in place. And what do I mean by that? I mean, well, we had to start out by finding the right algae that had the right benefits, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But we then had to do extensive safety work because these are new ingredients. So we had to do extensive safety work. We then had to take these ingredients through regulatory approvals in a wide variety of geographies. We had to scale them up into large manufacturing. And even once you're done with that, you have to go back and do another round of process development to make sure that these ingredients taste great. Because it doesn't matter how many other benefits you're bringing to the party. If they don't taste great, they don't get used, and all those other benefits are all for naught. Not only is algae the mother of all plants, it is Earth's original superfood. And this is particularly relevant as we look at macro trends around transparency, around better eating, around sustainability, and plant-based eating. Algae is Earth's original superfood. It has phenomenal nutritional properties, which I'll talk about in a minute. But in a world where people want to eat heirloom fruits and vegetables, and they want to eat ancient grains, there's nothing more heirloom, nothing more ancient, and nothing more original than algae. Before there was chia or acai or kale or quinoa, or frankly, whatever superfood comes next, there was algae. And more importantly, because people really want to understand what they're eating, it's been in our food chain. We talked a little bit about how all plants evolved from algae, but we've been consuming things containing algae for our lives. When you go have that wonderful salmon fillet, which I hope most of you are lucky enough to have once in a while if you eat fish, the omega-3s that you're desiring in that salmon are not produced in that salmon. The salmon eat algae, and the salmon eat things that eat algae. Those omega-3s that you desire are made in algae. We've been eating algae as long as we've been eating fish and a variety of other things. So algae's been in our food system. And what we've spent this time doing is to go out and look at this kingdom to find the best algae that provide a host of very clear benefits. And what kind of underpins this? Well, from my perspective, we spent a lot of time thinking about the how and the what and the why. Because you got to have motivation to get up every day. When you do something that takes as long as this has to bring new ingredients to the world with benefits, you have to have a clear perspective on why you're doing it. And for us, there's a few things. There's a blanket sustainability question, which I break up into two pieces. I break it up into doing more with the same land, which means to me, can you be more efficient and make more food with that same acre or hectare? And then there's a second kind of sustainability, which is the environmental impact of the production of that food. What's the carbon footprint? What's the water footprint of that? And then, even in places where we get way more than enough calories, there's nutritional security. Are we getting the right ones? And I don't need to spend time talking about that because I think other people, including the two gentlemen who came before me, did a wonderful job at talking about that. But from a practical perspective, it's getting people the right calories. And it's also doing it at accessible economics that allows broad adoption. And as I think I mentioned, it doesn't matter if you can bring all of those to the table if it doesn't taste great. Because people really don't want to compromise with respect to what they eat. And I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically here and tell you, we spent this time, we've developed 2 platforms. We've developed an oils platform from algae. Algae are the original oil producers on the planet. And we've developed a whole algae ingredients platform. And with respect to the oils platform as it relates to nutrition, our first product out is a product called Thrive Culinary Algae Oil. We spent a long time speaking to dozens of top physicians, dietitians, nutritionists, cardiologists, and what came back was, if you're going to make an oil, make it extraordinarily high in monounsaturated fat. And no matter what you hear from a trend perspective, we get more than enough saturated fat in our diets, so make it as low as possible in saturated fat. We developed an oil that's over 90% monounsaturated fat and less than 4% saturated fat. There is nothing else like it on the shelf at a grocery store. Not only that, it has a smoke point of almost 500 degrees, and it doesn't make a lot of those nasty carcinogenic products that other oils make when you cook with them. And then with respect to our powders, we looked at that and said, okay, we want to be able to make better, healthier bakery. We developed a lipid-rich, a healthy fat-rich whole algae. Protein, we need better sources of protein. We made an encapsulated, naturally, by the algae, protein. It's a protein-rich powder. And what's amazing about it is because of this natural encapsulation, which is basically the algae cell wall, you can incorporate more protein into a standard food product than with any of the plant-based proteins or animal-based proteins you can think of. You can make a cracker that has twice the amount of protein, twice the amount of fiber, and it still crunches, and it tastes great. And by the way, when you do that, it also has a dramatically lower glycemic index. So just to be clear, we've been through the whole process. I talked to you about scale-up, manufacturing, building plants. We are now in over 10 aisles of the grocery store with a host of different food companies. Everyone from the small guys creating unique egg replacements to some of the biggest food CPGs in the world who need better and healthier products. And for us, it's still early days. There is going to be a broad-based movement around eating algae because it is simply better in a lot of respects. And I mean, again, silver buckshot. Big believer in whole foods, in vegetables, in better and more sustainable agriculture, but I think we need a host of solutions, and this is an important piece of it. This is just an example of the protein. 3 times the amount of yield per acre as soy or pea, and when you get to whey and beef, the number goes up exponentially, with less carbon. And it is, frankly, the same story with our oils. And we are a public company, which has its blessings and its curses, but one of the points here is what you're looking at is ISO-compliant, third-party, peer-reviewed sustainability data that's been through some of the biggest companies in the world. Our job is to help build a movement toward better, more sustainable eating, to more accessible food, to more nutritious food, and I really strongly believe you're going to see a lot more algae in your diets moving forward, and we'll all benefit from it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to hand it over to, as our fourth speaker, Shakira Simley. She's the Community Programs Manager at Byright. And we're looking much forward to what you have to tell us all about, Shakira, this afternoon. So over to you.
Thank you, Thomas. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Good afternoon. Hello, it's after lunch. Wake up. How's it going? How many of you are from San Francisco? How many of you have traveled from out of town, out of the country? Thank you for being here. So, I want to first and foremost thank the Sustainable Food Trust, and thank you, Patrick, for inviting us here and bringing us all together for this very interesting panel. I'm going to present a different paradigm. So I'm just going to jump into it. So I think I'm going to go, okay. So that's Baby Shack. That's me. All right. So as a sophomore at the University of Pennsylvania, I discovered a term that described my hometown of Harlem, NYC, food desert. The term describes an area where supermarkets with healthy, fresh food are hard to access or non-existent. At the age of 11, I was responsible for our weekly grocery shopping and our meals while my mom went to school and worked full-time. Armed with our rickety shopping cart, coupons, food stamps, and a $20 bill, and maybe a younger sibling or two, I would begin the 30-minute walk to our nearest supermarket. Do the best you can, my mother told me. Regardless of the season, when I got to the grocery store, I was met by the world's saddest produce section. Bruised apples, browning bananas, wilted lettuce. Grocery items included canned, frozen, boxed, processed, and my personal favorite, old and expired. If I could buy everything on our list, I felt good. If not, I would quietly ask the cashier to take things out of my grocery bag, and shrinking as I heard the impatient sighs of the adult shoppers behind me. Although I did the best that I could, navigating these trips to the supermarket was tiring, was time-consuming, and was extremely humiliating. 20 years later, my grocery trips look different, mainly because I work for one. Buy Right is an independently owned family of sustainable food businesses here in San Francisco. What started out as a tiny store with 6 employees has now blossomed into a food mecca. We have 320 highly trained employees across 5 locations, 2 markets, a creamery and bake shop, a catering and commissary kitchen, and an organic farm. We're a certified B Corp, and we were recently honored as one of Forbes' 25 best small businesses in America. So, pretty cool. If good food were a religion, Buy Right would be its church. Our shelves are brimming with farm-direct produce, farm-fed cheeses, and sustainably sourced meat and fish. We have a killer wine selection, if you're interested, tons of handcrafted foods, and make our own freshly prepared meals and ice cream every single day. Led by our mission-driven founder and native San Franciscan, Sam O'Ganim, we've set a new standard for what good food retail should look like and taste like. Our revenues have grown by the double digits every year. We started out with $2 million, now we're at $45 million a year. Our sales per square foot are 5 times that of a successful Safeway, and we don't need a 3-acre parking lot to do this work. So how does the small, tiny market in San Francisco make this happen? Well, underneath our mission of creating community through food, we maintain financial sustainability to give great service and to provide great food with love, passion, and integrity. We nurture meaningful relationships with our staff, our guests, our producers, and the environment are all balanced and treated with the same respect. And to get to that apex on this triangle of social change, our vision for the future of food focuses on 3 things. 3 things. So stay with me. People, policy, and power. And since today we're hanging out with our food tech friends, just to borrow the punchline from the original Soylent, how many of you have heard of Soylent? Which comes from Soylent Green. We have a super aggro Charlton Heston. It's people, right? It's people. The future of food is people. So if we're going to fix food, we're going to have to fix labor, first and foremost. We need real human beings with real good food jobs in our community. We have to prioritize those who have their hand in the soil, those who have their hands in the kitchen, those who are in factories, and those who are on the store floor. At Buy Right, we can do what we do because of the incredible people that we hire, train, and promote. We spend 30 to 33% on staff for wages and benefits. We offer paid sick leave, health, vision, and dental insurance, a 401k with a 4% match, profit sharing, meals with every shift, and a schedule that's communicated 2 to 3 weeks out. And this is working. It's working really, really well. Our turnover is way below the industry average, and we also pay higher prices for the food that we purchase from our farmers, ranchers, and producers. Now, if you look at this slide, you'll get a sense of the true cost of good food. I know we're talking about the true cost of food, but I want to talk about the true cost of good food, which is it's more expensive, especially when you prioritize the health and well-being of your staff and your producers. And I want to say this should not be an outlier. This should be the standard. As we've heard over and over and over again in this conference, all people along the food chain deserve better. So, the future of food also looks a lot like meat. Young, black and brown, and hungry for change. So sorry to say that yes, millennials will inherit the earth. 20 to 30-year-olds have an estimated spending power of $2.45 trillion, and we make up the largest share of the United States workforce. Millennials are the most racially diverse generation in US history. 43% of us identify and are non-white. Young people are spending more money on food than clothing, and half of my generation identifies as a foodie. And we're Facebooking, Snapchatting, and Instagramming all along the way. We're skeptical about $1 cheeseburgers, we're saying hell no to GMOs, and we're forcing big food to go cage-free. However, we're not all faring so well. Millennials have the highest levels of student loan debt and unemployment. The USDA estimates that 3.5 million 18 to 34-year-olds are living in poverty in the United States. That's 1 in 5. There's a growing number of young Americans who have no idea where their next meal is coming from. So it's time to harness the energy and attention of this value-driven, food-obsessed generation to drive real change in the future of food. So my call to all of you is to hire us, to train us, to mentor us, to pay us fairly, because you need us and we need you. Young people of color, like myself, are also and are already leading the conversation on good food. Food justice parallels racial injustice. People of color disproportionately bear the burden of diet-related illness, poverty, and a lack of access to fresh, affordable food. For example, Latino workers in California and Oregon are leading a boycott against Driscoll's, and fast food workers of color are leading the Fight for 15 to bolster our minimum wage. These battles are being fought across the country on the backs of working class black and brown people who, in the immortal words of Fannie Lou Hamer, we're sick and tired of being sick and tired. So, simply put, we can't talk about what's on our table if we're not honest about who has a seat at that table, and we're not talking about who's at the head of that table. And when we do have all of those voices together and united, then maybe we can leverage all of our collective power through something that's also really important to us at Buy-Rate, which is policy. So the future of food, so people, policy. The future of food requires stronger policies to change individual and industry behavior. We need population-level policies on a local, state, and federal level to enact systemic change. If you change environments, you can change behavior. Policies do this, not just individual choices in the grocery aisle. This is what we need. So, as a progressive grocer, we want to see a real food revolution. We form relationships with local and state governments and also with nonprofits to champion good food and good business policies such as a local soda tax in San Francisco, and that's hopefully coming to Oakland as well. Statewide GMO labeling. We've also advocated for paid parental leave in San Francisco. We're also advocating for a standard date label in California to reduce food waste. We're also supporting legislation that directs investment to the most complex piece of food technology that we have on the planet, which is the soil. Let's not forget that. Let's also not forget the big stuff. We also need national policies to tackle the injustices of race, of the gender pay gap, wealth inequality, and immigration reform. All of these issues are key threads within the fabric of our food system. And last but not least, I want to talk about power. So in our vision for a future of food, we can't afford inequality. We need to dismantle corporate control of our food system by empowering our own local communities. So let's talk about what that power looks like. For us, local is power. 70% of our spend stays in the local economy. It stays in San Francisco. It stays in the Bay Area. Not true for some of our peers. For us, collaboration is power. That's why we provide free produce trainings to corner store owners within underserved communities in San Francisco and in Oakland. This allows businesses to support the neighborhoods where they live with fresh, healthy food, and it helps their bottom lines. Engagement is power. It means purchasing produce from our local public high school. Student farmers, they get a market rate from Buy Rate on their Mizuna and their kale, and they get money to invest back into their farm. We get hyper-local veggies for our produce case and for our nightly fresh dinners. But we didn't stop there. We also taught a professional development training program for 10 weeks every semester. And we were able to hire 5 youth over the past couple of years. Many are now who are in their first year of college. They're on scholarships in the UC system. And 3 of them are majoring in food, environmental-related studies, and in hospitality-related courses of study. I'll wrap it up, sorry. Get off my soapbox pretty soon. It sounds a little bit corny, but also knowledge is power. Last year, through the work of our partner organization, 18 Reasons, over 4,000 people received the confidence to shop, to cook, and to eat good, fresh food. This hard work happens every day at a cooking school on 18th Street, and also through a food nutrition program for low-income families in the Bay Area, and it's called Cooking Matters, and if you don't know it, please write it down. We need your help. Also, agency is power. We sponsor the EBT Match program at 2 farmers markets in the Bay Area. This program doubles the purchasing power of our neighbors who rely on CalFresh or on food stamps and puts more money in the pockets of our local farmers. So, by creating an empowerment model through food, Buy Rate is working to uphold the dignity and vibrancy of our community. I just want to end, the 11-year-old me, so the 11-year-old Shakira, she's still here. She lives in the Bayview. She lives in Baltimore. She lives in suburban Atlanta. And she also lives in rural Montana. It's been 20 years since those grocery trips. And the landscape still hasn't changed. So, I need your help to ensure that everyone has an equal opportunity to thrive. The future of food is being written now. What kind of author will you be? Thank you.
I'm going to hand over to Folkert and give you this interesting challenge of saying, what can we make out of this? And what kind of future do you see in what you've just heard?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Josh, Jonathan, David, Shakira. This is totally impressive. I mean, we all know that we're not going to solve the problems with the kind of thinking that created them in the first place. And you seem to be true pioneers, innovators who really demonstrate how you can redesign food systems altogether. All four of you, all in a completely different way. So first of all, a big compliment for that, very impressive, particularly for a simple Dutchman like me. I know all the future comes from California and the United States, and we always envy you for this enormous entrepreneurial spirit and vision. But I would also have a few questions. Because if we say we need to redesign food systems for obvious reasons, and we were halfway this conference, and I think the perverse incentives that lead to unhealthy, unecological, and unsocial food systems, they're obvious, they're clear. So first of all, how do you measure your contribution to health, people, and planet? Secondly, there's no such thing as sustainability without transparency. So how do you make these contributions transparent? And do you hold yourself accountable to just the old, perverse, short-term, profit-driven shareholder that led us into an economy that we have now today with all its problems? Or do you also hold yourself accountable to other stakeholders representing health, people, and planet? And if so, how do you do that? So first of all, how do you measure? How do you make things transparent? And what sort of new accountability do you see to make sure that you really do serve healthy, ecologically and socially sound food? And I would like to start with you, Josh. How do you see, because you're about redesigning food systems, and how would we, what we do if we'd have to start all over? So fascinating opening speech.
Thanks for saying that. I mean, to emphasize it again, and I think everyone should think about that question, if we could start over, if we didn't have to feel victims to everything all around us, what would the food system that we want actually look like? Our answer, and then it goes to what we measure, is if we could start over and create a food system where the good thing, the thing that is better for the environment, and here's how we quantify it: less land, less water, more supportive of farmers, less carbon intensity, ultimately better for animals too. That kind of food would be healthier food, and here's how we quantify it: less sodium, less cholesterol, less saturated fat, less crappy ingredients in it, more kind of whole foods approved stuff. And we quantify it, and we have methodologies to look at it. We work with a third-party consultant, and we track it and we share it. But if we could start over, that kind of food that you could quantify in that way would also be the food that you can quantify in another way. And that way is called, when you're on the shelves at Walmart, $3.49, and the bad thing is $4.19. And you quantify it in terms of cost, right? Because again, it's a fundamental belief that we had, rightly or wrongly. We can preach about this stuff all day and night. But unless you make it easier for a single mom living out of a white envelope who's walking into Walmart to eat the good thing, we're living in a fantasy land called San Francisco, California. And that's not the world I want to live in.
And do you include stakeholders in your governance system of your company? And if so, how do you do that?
So farmers are an important part.
Farmers, customers, doctors,
farmers, customers,
environmentalists.
Yeah, I got to say customers, one of the biggest surprises to me is if I was on this panel about 5 years ago, if I was being truthful, I would have said, you know, I'm really skeptical of these big companies. I'm really skeptical. I think Walmart, you know, might not be full of the best people. Target, Safeway, Dollar Tree. If I was being honest about it. Maybe I wouldn't do that because I don't want to harm my relationships, but just being real with you right now. But 5 years later, I think differently about it. I think that, you know, big retailers like Walmart, the biggest food service company in the world that we work with, Compass Group, or executives at places like the Dollar Tree, there's some that actually care. They actually do care. And if you can build relationships with those stakeholders at those biggest companies in the world that are pillars of the world's food system, instead of just kind of throwing rocks, you know, at their houses, you can work with them to build something different. So they're a part of it. Farmers, them, certainly team members. I'm sure these guys have felt it too all across the board that it's much easier to recruit people when you're doing something that people feel connected to. They feel like it's a part of a larger narrative that is more meaningful in their lives. So certainly our team counts as a part of that too.
Thank you, Josh. How about you, David?
Well, there's a lot that's similar. I think that the starting point on this issue is absolute transparency and rigor. So, you know, even as a company of 125 people, the numbers we quote are similar to what Josh does. We have a life cycle analysis. We carefully measure what resources we consume in the production of our product and at scale. But one point I want to be clear on, at least my own view is that profit is not the enemy. I think if one takes the view that a focus on sustainability requires ongoing commercial success, it's less about profit being the enemy and more about alignment to mission and your avoidance of short-term thinking. So we have benefit from having very long-term minded investors, and they are our stakeholder. And to be clear, I'm also the CFO, and I make sure we have transparency on our costs as much as we do on our environmental impact. I think with regard to...
Sorry for interrupting you, David.
Sure.
You're a CFO, right?
I am, yes.
Yeah, so you're transparent about costs.
Yes.
But in the context of this conference, how do you make your environmental and health and social impact transparent in terms of how do you monetize? Do you monetize these contributions?
So I don't believe that the consumer for our first product, the Impossible Burger, will be largely influenced by me conveying all of the facts on the true externalities and costs associated with producing a burger from a cow. The company itself takes the strong view of knowing that rigor, and as I mentioned with the life cycle analysis we do, we're very clear on our impact. Our go-to-market approach is to focus on taste, to establish a foothold as being a great tasting burger, and then as a secondary benefit to say without any compromise. It's also, by the way, true, not just with regard to environmental impact, we're very committed to the health and wellness story. I mean, zero cholesterol, just as much protein. This is a big part of the reason why we created this Impossible Burger. But aside from all of how we're going to market, I think it's really about being very transparent, being honest and rigorous about what it takes to produce your product, because candidly, at scale, all products are going to have some environmental impact and some health consequences, and being long-term minded with your investors.
So would your investors ask for an ecological balance sheet and an ecological profit and loss accounting? And if so, what would be the metrics for that? And if they don't, what are you going to do to produce these balance sheets?
Yeah, we don't wait for the investors. So in the fall of 2015, before my time, Pat Brown and the team looked at the amount of water we consume per unit of product, as well as the amount of land. We also measure what we estimate really what the greenhouse gas emissions would be from our product versus the alternative. It's less about our investors, it's frankly more about our mission. And if we don't know our own impact on the environment and on health and wellness, it'd be very hard to convince the discerning millennial consumer to buy our product. But it is not, again, the heart of the story of how we sell our product. We sell it as a great tasting burger.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, David. Jonathan.
So trying to unpack, there was a lot of elements to that question.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay. No, it was very thoughtful. I want to make sure I try to get the core. One thing for us is, which really does make everything we do have a different level of urgency and transparency, is that we're a public company. And we report quarterly.
That sounds like a problem.
Well, let me be clear. It has benefits and it has challenges. And I'll say that as an example, we've made a commitment for many years. The company's been around for 13 years. We've made a commitment to invest heavily in measuring the impact of what we do. And when I say measuring the impact, I mean really very specifically, deliberately, and quantitatively. My head of sustainability is actually in the room today. We have multiple consultants. We have people on staff full-time working in these areas. We've been measuring our footprint in a variety of ways for probably 7 or 8 years already. Very specifically with respect to water, very specifically with respect to carbon, very specifically with respect to the output of food per acre, per hectare. So a lot of the key elements of what we think are those externalities that don't get charged into the food system, which is why you can pay what you can pay for a double cheeseburger, right? So as a practical matter, that's not a profit center, which I think you understand, and reporting every quarter is probably the counterbalance to that. But we've made that commitment. Not only have we made that commitment, but I'm not only a big believer that there's a requirement for big and major changes, but that consumers are waking up, in fact, they're awake, and they're getting more and more charged up with the idea that they have a right to know what they're eating. And as the father of 2 young daughters and actually a 3rd child on the way, to me, I think consumers really do have an absolute right to know. And so not only have we been going out over the last few years and measuring our footprint very deliberately and reporting on it, but we've had meetings over the last 2 or 3 years with over 50 NGOs, if you include organizations and academia, and all of the people who have come in asking us questions or challenging us. Hundreds of meetings at this point, probably. And not only that, but we actually publish a very detailed sustainability report, which you can find accessible on our website, in which we really go through a lot of the elements of what we do. And I think it's absolutely critical because this is where the future is. And I also agree with Josh. I don't know what I would have said 5 years ago, but I do think for better and for better, there are people, and this goes to Shakira's comments, there's a lot of millennials now in some of those big companies. And there are changes, and there are people in those companies who really do care, and they care about what ingredients they're using to make the things they're making more than they ever did before. And so, writ large, I think that all of these things need to be baked into the way that you do business, and more companies are responding that way. There's still a long way to go.
Thank you. Shakira, you showed a little breakdown of your costs and the percentages.
We did, and which I think that is a big example of how we're transparent. We're not just saying that we're transparent, I just showed you how we were transparent. And I think when we talk about transparency, it's very different than maybe some of my colleagues and how they define transparency. And when we talk about sustainability, the way we talk about it is quite different as well. First and foremost, we're not beholden to stakeholders, we're beholden to farmers, the soil and the environment. That makes for a radically different business model. And I think we need to be real when we're talking here. Kind of like drill, baby, drill. When you are thinking about the intersection of food and tech, it's scale, baby, scale. And when you're talking about good food, good, sustainable, transparent food, where you know where it came from, who made it, where it came from, who made it, who was the person in the kitchen, how long it's going to last, and how you shouldn't waste it. All of those different things, we can say that for, I'd say, over 50% of the food that we have on our shelves. That is incredible. There are not many other retailers that can do that. Also, a lot of that food is what we make ourselves. When we're talking about food and tech, because this is this panel, even though I think the future of food is way broader than food and tech, obviously. The way in which tech versus food is funded, distributed, produced, engaged with, sold, and profitable that doesn't translate very seamlessly or very well into food. And because you're dealing with finite resources, you're dealing with more people who have their hands in the process, you're dealing with limited resources. So for example, if I have a good idea and I want to start a food business, it's not a food business, a real good food, fresh food business, no one's going to give me $500 million to do that. They're not. I'm sorry. And that's real. And that's something we're facing in the Bay Area and facing with the viability of restaurants, of my friend Michelle, who makes the world's best granola. I mean, it's hard. So I think there's, like I said, I think there's room at the table and there's space for everyone to work together. But I am a little doubtful. And I want us to maybe unpack that a little bit more.
And when will you be listing one of these new beef burgers or algae crackers?
What do you mean? At Byrate?
Your left neighbors over there, they will be launching products soon, and or mayonnaise.
Oh, well, we do sell just mayo. It's in our cold case. And we have not made decisions about the allergy crackers or the beef burger. I think it's really interesting. Like I said, I'm not like anti-tech. Like I'm a millennial for fuck's sake. Like that's not gonna change. And I'm not anti-science either. But I'm interested in the science, like I said, of the soil, of farms, and rethinking labor in order to do those things better. And I want that to be our vision when we're talking about the future of food. That's extremely important to me.
Okay. Well, before I hand over back to Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank you very much for your vision, the power, and your ability to, or your attempts to redesign food systems. I'm not sure if I would buy these algae products, even if that's sort of the future, but...
You may be eating them already, though. You may not know
probably. And, well, anyway, yeah, thank you very much.
You've been eating algae already, and you're going to keep eating it, I would suggest.
I'm not sure about David's beef burger either, though, but that's purely personal.
We'll convert you. We'll convert you. Just takes time.
But thank you very much again, and please, Thomas.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you, Volkert, for this round. I'm going to hand it out to you guys, and I'm going to take 3 questions at a time. And I'll start with Mr. Shapiro there.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the great panelists. Let's give them all a round of applause.
Yeah.
I would be very excited to eat the Impossible Burger, first of all, David. So sign me up. If we don't have a big fan, I'm going to get in front of the line in front of him. So
I will get you a burger.
Okay, good. Thank you. So first, I commend all of you for what you're doing to help reduce demand for factory farming. What you all are doing is really groundbreaking, and my hat is off to you. A key issue that many of you discussed is getting the price down to be not just cost competitive, but cost superior to the factory farm alternatives. On the flip side, there are lots of public policies, mainly through the Farm Bill, that help depress artificially the cost of those you're competing against. And some of you are running very well capitalized companies who do have a lot of money. Some of you are now investing in lobby power in Washington. I'm wondering if you all have thought about not just lobbying on behalf of your own companies for your own specific interests, but also getting involved in the Farm Bill fight that's coming up in Washington to help remove some of these subsidies that are keeping your competitors at a cost competitive advantage over you.
Great question. Was it Michael? Did you have, yeah, Michael Antonio, please? And then Guillaume.
Thank you very much. So yes, I'm Michael Antonio. I'm from King's College London. I guess, especially in the context of this conference, I would say that the processed foods that the 3 gentlemen here presented go diametrically opposite to the direction that I think we'll be advocating here. Yes, we all agree that perhaps we need to go to largely plant-based diets in order for everybody to have enough to eat in a very sustainable way. But processed foods for me are not the way future. They are energy intensive. I know maybe your products are using up less energy than than growing the cow and eating it. But nevertheless, industrially produced products may have the largest profit margins, but they are energy intensive. And I feel that just eating the plant product as close as possible as it comes out from its source is clearly not only going to be providing us with tasty and most nutritious food, but it's also going to be the least impactful on the environment. Also, I would question the things that
Could you turn it into a question, Michael?
Yeah, this is the point. None of you mentioned the fact that processed foods, because of their process, they lose their smell, there's no taste, the flavor, and that you need to put artificial, industrially synthesized chemicals in there to put back flavors, tastes. And I want to ask this, what kinds of additives are you putting into your products to put back the taste and the smell and the flavor that was removed in the processing? And what safety evaluation, because I'm a health scientist, what safety evaluation have you made of the additives in these products? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll just have one more question, and then there's Guillermo. Sorry, well, Guillermo's right here and there.
Thank you. Guillermo Castilleja, I'm not going to ask you about what you just presented, but because you have been thinking about the future, I want to ask you about how do you envision food in the future when you think about food not just as the nutrients that you eat, but as a culture that represents eating food? What are the major changes that you envisage in the future?
Thank you. Okay, who wants to open?
Your name was Michael? Michael.
Well,
so if you could start over, Michael, right? And just focus on like what you want. Don't even focus on the means to get there for a second. So forget about local organic. Just focus on, and this is to everyone too. Like focus on what the point is, right? In terms of impact, in terms of farmer livelihoods for you. If we could design the perfect food system, what would the actual impact look like for you? And sorry to belabor the point. Just let's forget about the debate, organic, non. Just what do you, in a perfect world, if you could fast forward 20 years from now and say, you know what, I want this amount of carbon, I want this amount of cholesterol, I want this amount of sodium, I want this number of farmers empowered. What does that actually look like for you?
What it looks like for me is perhaps what I started. I was actually born in Cyprus, of a family of modest means, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
And at that time, virtually everybody in that country, things were delivered fresh to the market that day, almost by the farmers. For me, eating as close as possible to the primary source with largely plant-based diets I feel is,
right.
in a way, is to go back to how it was before industrial food became the dominant factor in the food supply.
And I'm guessing, and thank you for that. I'm guessing lots of it's difficult to be like a smart thinking person and not agree with that, right? Of course, in a perfect world, we would eat more local plant-based foods. And if I could snap my fingers right now and get the world to do that, I would. I will say though that think about the answer and think about like what that means in a deeper way. If more people ate like that, what would that mean? What would it mean? We would use less carbon, right? It would mean we'd respect the land more, right? It'd mean we'd be more supportive of farmers, right? It'd mean we'd have more nutrient-dense food, right? Here's the problem. I do not think, and maybe this is me being skeptical, that we can do that in a way that is scalable, in a way that is fast, in a way that we act as if we only have 10 years left on the planet just by using that approach. I think it requires something different. This is not the singular approach, but I think we've got to figure out a way to do these scalable things really fast, because the point is, I think what we all agree with, make the good thing better than the not so good thing.
Josh, we've got it. You made your point very well. Thank you. Okay, so Jonathan?
So I actually think that what Michael said makes lots of sense. He's talking about eating whole foods, eating things out of the ground, understanding what you eat, and doing it with the lowest impact possible. I guess where I got kind of sideways in the question was around the word processed, which is a pretty loaded word. A lot of the ingredients we make ingredients. Okay, we make oils, which are used broadly around the world for cooking. It's a critical element all over the world in cooking and nutrition. We make oils, and we make oils by growing algae and then using expeller presses to press the algae out the same way it's pressed out from coconuts. And we make whole algae powders. We make a protein-rich powder, and we make a healthy fats-rich powder. And the only ingredients in those are the algae. Occasionally, if they're going to go into something, somebody might add mixed tocopherols, which are basically carotenoids, naturally occurring carotenoids as preservatives. But I think the bottom line is we're looking at how to do the right thing, how to make improvements. And I actually agree completely with Michael that figuring out ways to bring more whole foods to people, more natural whole foods to people at an economic cost with the right nutrition is the admirable goal. But I wouldn't make the assumption that what any of us is doing is contrary to that. And I think that's where I kind of get hung up a little bit on the question. That's exactly what I think we're doing as a practical matter.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. David?
I think the reality is that the utopia you describe, I would love to live in. So we're not misaligned with regard to the impact that could have. I think at Impossible Foods, our mission is about large-scale impact. So if consumers even eating locally are consuming animal protein, that even if it's not from a large farm, is still consuming our resources in an unsustainable way, that's a part of the story of your vision that's difficult for our mission. I think that where we're getting hung up is this notion of innovation. Yes, I will argue that we are not grown on a vine and can be picked at a local farmer the way you grew up in Cyprus. But in order to accommodate all of the compromises in order to have scale impact, we are focused on innovation. In terms of synthetics, you asked the question, what are all the additives that we use to replace the products? We are not synthesized. It's hard to imagine. We use yeast to source our heme. We use potato protein. We don't actually have a lot of synthetic or chemicals, if any, at all in our product. But I want to be clear, we do use science and innovation to conquer what I think to be a pretty daunting task. I wish we could have your utopia. But the way to get there is the question, less a misalignment on what would be nice.
Thank you, David. Shakira?
I'd like to bring this together and also answer, Guillermo, your question. I would hope that and I want to respect the intention that we're all up here trying to do something really important. And I completely respect that amongst all of you. We want to disrupt big food. We want to get people to eat better. We want to improve the health of our communities. I think that's really important. I would also hope that our future of food is less elemental and essentialist. And that's what I'm hearing. So when I eat lentils, I'm not eating it just to get a quick, simple protein. I'm eating dal because I want to have a meal with a friend, her mother's recipe from India, and there's a culture, there's a story, there is a sense of place and a sense of taste to that food. And that's my vision for a future of food and a culture around food. It has those connections. So when we break food down to these elemental, essential qualities, I think we're losing a lot in the process of how, maybe beyond the American context, how everyone eats. I studied in Italy several years ago, and that was a really formative part of my food experience. And one of the main things, yes, we had this amazing Piedmontese steak from this special white cow, and had a crazy, amazing flat iron, sat around the table. But it wasn't so much that we wanted to sit down and eat protein. It was that we were sharing a meal together, and at a specific time, and it tasted a certain way, and it was connected to the land, and the people, and the kitchen, and the soil. So if we're going to talk about together, like I said, come around that table, around that future of food, I want us to move in that direction.
Thank you. Another 3 questions. I think we have the gentleman in the back there.
Just quick on Paul's, because I want to.
Yeah, we never got to his.
Paul asked a really good question on policy. 30 seconds on it, Paul. And if you don't know, if you don't know Paul Shapiro, he's been a hero for this food system for way before I even knew anything about food. But the policy question is really big, as you know, man. And one of the things we're trying to do with this, what would it look like if it started over mentality, is ask that when it comes to policy. We just hired a VP of policy, used to be the chief of staff to the Secretary of Agriculture. And I think there are a lot of policies, certainly getting in the Farm Bill and improving is one of them. Also, crop insurance is another. Right now, lots of farmers don't grow kale and carrots and things like that because there's not insurance markets that can really support it. So how do we get in there and really fix that broken market? So I think there are a lot of things like that, Paul.
Josh, make it short because we have a limited time.
There are a lot of things like that, Paul, that I think we could all, in a more scalable way, work in policy to improve.
Thank you. Okay, so there's a gentleman there.
Michael Dimick. I'm interested in kind of building after a couple of things that were said here about the vision of the future. Because actually Joel brought up the fact that there's an integral link between the biology that's living on the planet and the animals. So as we move away from an animal-based agriculture, we have to think about the implications for the biology, the plant life, particularly in the grasslands. So if in fact the types of companies that you guys are innovating became the dominant paradigm in the world, what would that mean for the ecology of the world? I'm very curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Patrick Holden.
Just to say, add to what's already been said, thank you for agreeing to do this panel. I'm really loving it because it's just an open, positive, and transparent discussion, and I think it's fantastic. So thank you very much for all of you for participating. One question and one comment. The question is, would you all be prepared to submit yourselves, that's the wrong word, to partner in an investigation using the kind of metrics that Dr. Harpender Sandhu, I don't know if you were here for his session this morning, but he's developing a methodology for assessing the externalities of different food systems. And it would be really interesting if you would be willing in principle to be part of that hopefully converging assessment process. The second thing is, after you get back from this conference, you should really watch, when we put it on our website, the session that I attended yesterday on the fat of the land, because it turns out that the old orthodoxy about saturated fat is rapidly changing, and in fact, it turns out saturated fat's good after all. So I'm just wondering what you would say about that particular thing, because things are changing.
Okay, and there's Albert Strauss at the back, and okay, yeah, then we'll take that one over there. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Huda and I'm a journalist. My question relates to the first one that was asked on the second set. When we talk about the future of food, this panel opened up with the fact that there's also a question mark appended at the end of that. And I think that has to do, in part, with the effect that humans have on the planet. And if we're turning to plant-based sources, and in the face of climate change, wouldn't that ultimately limit where we're getting these alternatives from? I think they're great ideas. I think it's good that we're looking at these solutions. But aren't there competing pressures against what you're trying to do? Also, I'm surprised that we haven't talked about eating bugs yet. That's all.
Okay. So we're running out of time, so I just need some crisp, short answers to these three great questions.
Let me start.
David?
Listen, our mission is about using less resources for the same product. And right now, we're acknowledging the trillion-dollar meat industry. We're acknowledging the almost $500 billion global market for ground beef as a reality. So if we're using 1% of, say, the land and 15% of the same amount of greenhouse gases emissions and a fraction of the resources available from a water standpoint, we're hopeful that we are, however, the fight against climate change continues, that we're contributing towards the cause. With regard to government relations, listen, having run Del Monte Foods and Del Monte's GR program for a number of years, again, potentially on the wrong side of the issue, we also believe, as Josh mentioned, that we need to have a voice on the Hill, and we need to acknowledge, sometimes I think hubris from great revolutionary companies tends to disavow the realities of the world, and the reality of this US market is that it's regulated. And so, along with Josh, we also believe that we should be part of that discussion. We can't afford not to be.
Thank you. Jonathan?
So, very quickly, try to do it crisply. There were a couple of questions that I want to just address. I think the first one was about if what you guys are doing was broadly adopted, what does that mean from there's a whole layer of externalities that probably come along with that. And the quick answer is, although algae was around making oils, proteins, and fats and micronutrients before anything else, and I think our products are great, I certainly don't think it's the only thing people should be eating. I think people should be eating dal, eating lentils, eating a wide variety of things. I think people will be eating algae as one of those things, and as we are the ones that are growing the algae for food, we're very thoughtful and selective about where we decide to do that and how we decide to do it. And all of our measurements from a sustainability standpoint take into account indirect land use, which is a metric. And I think just very quickly also a question on saturated fat. Science continues to change. Again, algae have been making oils and fats since before anything else that produces them, whether it's palm or coconut or olive, and they make highly saturated oils. They make highly monounsaturated, polyunsaturated oils. We don't have a dog in the fight. We developed our first oil based on input from a wide variety of scientists we respected, but we have a variety of oils that I think will cover all kinds of nutritional futures.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to have to close this session because we have the next thing taking place. But I want you to join me in thanking these people. And just listen to this before you put your hands together. I find it very interesting that these are pictures of the future from a food industry perspective and from a retail perspective. But these are not opaque, anonymous input providers or a big box retailer who doesn't really tell. These are people who stand by their actions, they're willing to be accounted for, and they're transparent. And I'd like to compliment, and that is maybe some part of this millennial thing, you're doing and you're practicing what you preach and you're willing to stand by it. So thanks for that.
Bravo.